Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to helping business owners prepare for exit so they can maximize value and exit on your own terms. This is the Exit Insights podcast presented by Succession Plus. And today I'm talking to Phil Fraser. Welcome, Phil, and thanks for joining me on the podcast today. I think it'd be a great start. I think you've got a really interesting background. So if you can just sort of give us a bit about your background and set us up to why we're talking today, and that'll give the listeners some context for our conversation.
Okay, great. Hi, Daryl. Thanks for having me on. Okay, let's do the story really quickly. Let's cover 18 years in 30 seconds. I set up a business. Back in 2000 by accident with myself, my wife. Our first full-time staff members didn't come along until the 5th year, and then after 18 years, we sold the business to a PLC.
That is a whirlwind story, from accidental entrepreneur to the desirable exit that everybody wants, which is what makes you an ideal guest. So
thank you,
Phil. You sold the business back in, I think, in our pre-talk, 2018. Can you talk us through the process of actually exiting your business from, were you expecting it? Were you planning it? Were you approached out of the blue? What happened?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you talk to business owners about business sale, and you'll know this, a lot of them then get very protective about their businesses. It's my baby, I can't let it go. Oh my God, what might happen to all the staff? All those sorts of things, which are all totally acceptable, totally understandable. And to a degree, we were like that. This was our baby. It started from nothing. But for whatever reason, I was always of the opinion, look, if somebody gives me enough money, I'll give them the keys. It's quite straightforward. So we'd never fully been for sale, but we'd always been open to approaches. Although having said that, we were for sale at one period, and that's a different story. But the way we sold, our market had a number of high profile acquisitive companies. So it's very high profile. There was lots of M&A going on in the market. We were approached by a company who said, we'll give you X. And I thought, okay, that's a big enough number. We went to meet them, as is often the case with business sales. There were a number of caveats. There was an earn-out, all sorts of different things. So it wasn't really right for us. But having had our appetite whetted by this acquisitive company, we sort of spoke to a number of other acquisition companies and said, look, we're not proactively for sale, but if you want to talk now's the time to talk to us. And what happened was one of those companies came back to us. We talked to them. We actually got very close with them. And then one of the other ones who'd initially said, we're not interested, actually came back and said, yes, we are interested. So I said, look, I'm talking to these guys, I don't want to let them down. I'm a man of my word. We're very close to heads of terms. You have to move the dial, which they did, and not only financially, but package wise. And that was the sale. I agreed the sale with the CEO over a couple of phone calls and a couple of emails. I knew the guy we'd met before. And then it went to the lawyers, and 4.5 months later, the sale went through. We had a 3-month handover. And at the end of the 3 months, I had all my money.
Wow, you realize how fast that is, don't you?
Yep. And actually, that felt the turnaround from agreement to actually sort of handing over the keys, or at least signing that. I think we agreed the deal in November 2017. We signed on the dotted line April 2018, and we finished. April, May, June, mid-July 2018.
Wow, that's the benchmark story. That's the story that every business owner wants when they come to exit their business. So I'll pick up on a couple of things, if I may. You mentioned, hey, look, my business. I had the philosophy my business was always for sale, and if someone offers a big enough number, I'll take it. I hear a lot of business owners say that. How hard is it, or how easy is it to say it, and then someone actually comes and says, hey, look, this could actually become a reality, what happened? How did you feel? How did you respond? What's the reality as opposed to the theory?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, and sort of after the fact, I think I've realized a couple of things about that positioning from me. One of it was actually some advice a friend's father gave me a number of years ago, and he always said, "Don't be ashamed of taking a profit." And he was actually talking about shares and stuff like that at the time. People always say, "Oh, I'll hang on till we get another 2p or another 10 pence or another pound." And sometimes, do you know what? I'm 50p up, I'll take it. So that seed of thought was always in my mind that, look, if you take a profit, take the money off the table, there's no shame in that. There might be more on the table later, there might not be, you don't know. So that was the first thing. And the second thing I think that drove me was I have a lot of imposter syndrome in me. And almost that thought process of, quick, let's sell before they find out we don't know what we're doing.
So you say imposter syndrome, I say human.
Yeah, and I think that was sometimes underlying it as well. And I think the other thing that I think eventually made it easy was we were doing very well at the time we sold. It was a very profitable business, and we always had the backdrop of, well, if we don't sell it, it's no big deal. So it's not it's not what the American football would call a Hail Mary. It's just and that's why we could sit and wait till we got a very good deal.
Yeah, you weren't,
because if we didn't,
outcome, which is really, the language we use, that really is doing it on your terms.
And it's not. Sorry, you get a lot of people who will build a business over their lifetime, and it will be, in effect, it's their pension, it's their retirement fund, and that's really not the way or it's not the position to get into to sell a business, because that is a Hail Mary. That's a shit or bust. So we were fortunate that had any sale not happened, fine, carry on. It wasn't a fire sale. I wasn't desperate to get out. I'd actually put a structure in place where I wasn't working day to day, or I wasn't key to the business on a day-to-day basis, which again is something I talked about with clients about.
Yeah.
So we were able to go into a sales process quite chilled about the whole thing, that, hey, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm sure there'll be somebody else further down the line. And in fact, at the time of our sale, our number 2 competitor was also on the market, and we had been talking to the vendors of them. So our plan B was actually, let's look at maybe buying out the number 2. So there were lots of options in place. Yes, it gets emotional when you sell, and that's down to the team and everything else that goes around it, more than the business itself. I think I emotionally detached myself from, I was proud of it. It was something, it was our baby, we built it, but I wasn't tied to it like a lot of people are with their own business.
Yeah. And you're hitting on a couple of really good points there. So, one of the things that I really liked you saying and liked hearing was the fact that you had no attachment to the outcome. You weren't desperate to sell, and your attitude, your mindset, by the sounds of it, was, hey, if we don't sell, no worries. We'll actually go down the other route and we'll look at acquiring our number 2. So we've got options. So, that puts you in the driver's seat. You also said something else about, business owners think of their business, like it's their pension, and, they it's kind of all bet, bet everything on black type of thing. Did you have any consciousness or awareness of your personal financial position? Like, were you financially secure with or without the business exit, and were you conscious of that and thinking about that?
Yeah, I think that does help. And it's interesting. I've since the sale, I've become a lot more interested in M&A and stuff like that. And often what you'll find is business owners have actually taken a huge, and quite rightly so, taken a huge amount of value out of their business during the growth process. Mm-hmm. So they're not, at the end, they're not thinking, shit, if I don't sell, I haven't got any money. If you're running a successful business, you will take out salary, dividends, additional things around the sides that help from a lifestyle point of view. And we'd been fortunate enough to be able to do that, having started with nothing.
Yep.
So I had no qualms about taking the dividends, taking the benefits of all that hard work during the time. So when we sold, and it's not meant to sound arrogant or anything like that, it was a lump sum on the end of the value we'd already extracted during the lifetime we'd run the business. And you would think most business owners with a successful business will have done that over the period of time.
Well,
I say most, and that's an ideal and all that sort of thing, but a lot of people will be, and this is where again you get to this whole issue of what are you selling? Are you the business? Is actually what you've got not a business but a job?
Yep.
And that's the difference.
So yeah, look, one of the things that I'm glad you said it, because I think business owners need to hear it. It's okay to take money out and extract money from the business along the way and live. You're taking risk for your reward. It's reward for the risk taken. And what I've seen out there is business owners who have built or extracted funding or finance along the way and invested it outside of the business. At some point, they realize, you know what, I can live off my investments. The business is now cream. Doesn't mean I'm going to sell it for under value, but it's recognizing that I've extracted enough value and I've got value outside of the business. Once they recognize that, they actually become better leaders in the business, because all of a sudden they don't have all of this stress inside built up, placing it on them and putting pressure on them that they have to keep performing in the business and they have to have the business keep growing. It's not a have to have anymore. So because of that pressure's gone, they actually perform better as leaders or into mentors or chair or whatever role they undertake in their business. You also mentioned that you extracted yourself out of the business from a day-to-day role. So what sort of involvement did you have in the business, Phil? What sort of what sort of role did you?
Yeah, if we go back, I alluded to it earlier on. Probably 5 or 6 years before we finally sold, I'd got to the point, and again, not meant to sound arrogant or condescending or anything like that. I got to the point where actually I was a little bit bored with the business. There is a difference between being an entrepreneur and going through the excitement of the startup and growth phase, and certain people, and I'd probably include myself in it, you plateau and all the plates are spinning and you go, well, this is it's a successful business, but it's a bit boring. I'm not doing a great deal. So actually I got bored with the business and decided, right, we'll sell and I'll do something else. There's going to be something more exciting. Yeah. And so we put the business up for sale, but we'd always, at that point, we had a plan B, which was actually not to sell and then get somebody else in to run it for me. The sale didn't go through. It was our choice. We pulled out, and I got a number 2 involved. And by the end, my role was joint with him to set strategy, to manage and motivate him, and sort of manage the financial side of the business, and the rest of it was down to him. So that when I sold, you could unplug me from the business and it wouldn't make any difference. Yeah. And I talk to clients about this now, about doing some, actually a business sales agent told me this, and I thought it was great, is actually, can you do a 2-week holiday test on your business? So can you go on holiday and not have your phone and laptop by the pool? Can you go on holiday and the business still run without you? If it's a yes, you have a saleable business. If it's a no and you're sat on the beach, firing orders out and talking to clients and all that sort of thing, you haven't got a saleable business yet. Yeah. And I fortunately had got to that point where, like I say, my role changed from entrepreneur, driver, enthusiast to sort of keeping my number 2 not in check, but just keeping him motivated and targeted and on course, and let him get on with it.
Yeah, and that's a great litmus test, and I've heard similar things before. And one of the things that I encourage business founders to move towards is to, they want to get themselves into a position where they're only doing 3 things in the business. First one is to manage the context, or this is the vision of the business, this is where we're going, this is our purpose, our why, our big meaning. The next one is they've got to manage the energy. Regardless of whatever happens in the business, the culture is set, the tone of the business is set by the founders of the business. If they're involved in the business in any way, they set the tone of the culture. So they need to manage the energy. And the third one is coach, not play. So, you guys call it mentoring, call it whatever you like, but not have an operational responsibility in the business. Just be the person guiding, mentoring, steering. And when you're just working in those three areas of the business, you've got a business that's exitable, and increases your attractiveness to an acquirer, and not just any acquirer. That makes the business more attractive to a strategic acquirer as opposed to a competitor, just buying out someone else buying out a competitor. Someone who's strategic is going to pay a higher valuation. It's going to be more attractive to them. Okay, so you're now on the outside. I think you help act as a sounding board to other business owners who are on their journey. What's the tone of the advice you give them, Phil? What would you advise a business owner who's right at the beginning of their journey of starting to think about what's next for them, their exit?
So my role, and I use the term business sounding board. It's half coach, half mentor. It's really to be there to avoid, and I know it's a cliche, but to avoid the business owner being lonely at the top. When you're running your own business, you have to make the big calls. Now that might be strategic, it might be acquisition, it might be selling, it's often HR. And in a lot of cases, you're the one who's got to sit in your office or at home at the weekend and think, shit, what do I do? And that might be a positive shit, what do I do? Or it might be a negative shit, what do I do? And there's not usually somebody to be able to speak to do that. And that's what I do. I'm there to be able to sit with somebody and they go, Phil, I've got this issue, opportunity, problem, conundrum, whatever it might be. Can I just talk to you about it? And what I'm doing is, the name says it all. I'm being a sounding board. I'm passing things back to them and I'm asking them questions. So why do you think that? What's good about that? What's bad about that? What might be the issue with that? And helping them make their decisions. I'm not like a consultant who'll come in and sort of rip your supply chain apart or put together a sales process for you. I am helping the decision maker make better decisions or more informed decisions, but just being there to say, okay, let's talk about it. And the beauty, and I think the benefit, there's a number of benefits I think I've got over a number of other people that a business owner might go to. So a business owner might go to their husband or wife, or they might go to their accountant, or they might go to a friend who's also got a business. The problem with the advice you get from those people is they have a dog in the game.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine who's a business mentor, business coach, uses the phrase, somebody's got to tell you your baby's ugly. And, you're metaphorically speaking, and your wife might not do that, or your husband might not do that, or your accountant might not do that, or your mate who you play golf with, or you go to the match with, who's also got a business, might not do that. I can do that because I'm independent, but also I can do it because I've been there and done it and got the battle scars. So it might not have happened exactly the same when I did it, but I will have probably experienced something similar. So it goes along the lines of, well, when we had an issue similar to that, this is how it played out for us. We considered X, Y, and Z. For your situation, you might also want to consider X, Y, and Z. And then the business owner who's in front of me sits and goes, yeah, I didn't think of that, or that's a good point, or, oh, yes, I can see where that might fit in where we are. And then they go away and decide what they want to do.
Yeah. Sometimes referred to as a 30,000 foot view, or helicopter view, or something like that.
Correct.
And the way I see it, and relating it back to your experience in business, it sounds like the role you play now is that person who, when the business owner gets bored of running the business, because they're basically career bored, they've been doing it the same thing, and they're just going, well, it's the same thing day in, day out. I'm just running the business, doing more of the same. someone like yourself can then come in and go, well, let me drag you out of that day-to-day running of the business and show you what you need to be doing to strategically run the business, to be thinking ahead of the business so you're driving it forward rather than just incrementing forward with those micro steps forward running the business. And I see great value in that, because business owners, they often, let's have a look. Most of them start their business out of an industry they're already familiar with. An accountant will start an accounting practice. A butcher will start a butchery. A candlestick maker will start a business selling candlesticks. So they're really good at the operational work, and they're really familiar with the operational work. And there's enough of that work to keep them busy day to day. They become bored of it, but they don't know how to do the strategic stuff of working on the business. They all know they should be doing it, but no one's ever taught them how to do it. So it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, your guiding hand, you're pointing them in the right direction, going, what if, why, and holding them to account, because as you say, it is lonely at the top, and your partner, your spouse, your mate down the pub don't have enough vested interest to really know what's going on and actually hold you to account. They don't have that position. Dynamics at home are different, but someone needs to hold your feet to the fire and make sure that you actually make the change that is required to take that business to the next level.
Yeah, and actually, just going back on one of the things you just mentioned there, one of my clients, my early clients, had grown the business to a huge size. I got involved, and what she hadn't realized is the change from being operational to a CEO. She was still in startup mode and doing the minutiae and doing the stuff she enjoyed doing, which is fair enough, but actually hadn't taken that step back. And I had to be the one to say to her, look, you are now a CEO of a £5-6 million turnover business, whereas she was still, a lot of her was still in startup mode. And actually, I went to see her this week, and she very proudly showed me her PA. Look, I've got a PA now. I'm a proper grown-up CEO, which was brilliant. And now we're talking about bigger picture stuff and how we can, change her role and what's required in her role. So sometimes you just need somebody to stand in front of you and say, why are you still doing that? Because you end up doing that. And again, using the example, and I will always try and do this with clients, is it will usually come back to something I've done. 4 or 5 years out from us selling to a PLC, I was still the one, sending out invoices. Well, I'm the CEO of a multi-million-pound turnover business, and I'm sending out the invoices. I mean, how stupid is that? But when you start, you do everything, and then you sort of slice things off as you grow a team, and you give different people different responsibilities. And often what you're left with is the stuff you haven't got somebody else in to do yet, or the stuff you like doing. So I'm not going to let go of that. But as a CEO, you shouldn't be doing them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And do you have a perspective of when that change needs to happen? So you referred to your client she's the CEO of a much bigger business, but because she started the business, she gave birth to it. She nursed it through all those late nights and months where she didn't even know if she's going to make payroll, to being the key person in the business and making it happen every day. At some point, you got to keep growing. Is there a transition point? What's your experience of where that transition point lies from where they've got to start making that shift?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's actually, I don't think there's anything specific. There's a couple of things I've come across that I think tend to be the trigger. And the first, I think, is when you get to a team of maybe 5 or 6 people, it just by the nature of numbers, you have to start being a little bit less hands-on and more, your role changes from doing to sort of motivating and directing. And it's sort of around that period. But I was listening to a podcast a while ago, and a guy was saying that the big step changes in business growth happen when your turnover hits different 1s and 3s. So the thing that'll get you to 10 grand turnover isn't the same that'll get you to 30 grand turnover. And the things that get you to 30 grand turnover won't be the same things that get you to 100 grand turnover. And then I don't know, I don't know if it's factually based or experience based, but he was saying ones and threes. But if you think about it, and we'll do it at the small end first, and it works. You know, working from home, side hustle, you can probably knock out 10 grand turnover. I'm being a bit facetious, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, it's.
And then there's the step from 10 to 30. Now that might be, you know, if you take e-commerce for an example, because everybody can do that from home. You know, you can do that 10 grand yourself. At 30 grand, you start needing maybe your wife or husband or kids to do some of the packaging, taking stuff down to the post office, posting some more content online, all that sort of stuff. And you can get to 30 grand doing that. To get to 100 grand, you're probably going to need to take on a freelancer or a member of staff. And then to get from 100 to 300, now we're starting to talk maybe starting to be a proper business, and maybe a couple of staff, maybe a couple of systems in place. And then to go from, you know, where are we at now? Well, that's where we are. 100 to 300 and 300 to 1 million. They're the big step changes. Now, I don't know whether that is the case. And I'm trying to think back in my journey. My step changes seem to be when we took staff on organically. So it's like, right, we're at capacity, we need another member of staff. And each time we did that, our capacity went up. So in terms of needing external advice, you're probably looking somewhere between 300, 500 grand turnover, 5 or 6 staff. That sort of position, I think, is when your role starts changing as an SME, starts changing from startup entrepreneur to a bit more management.
Yeah. Well, no, it's fascinating, you know, conversation to give these metrics and guides to business owners. I know one of the popular ones used is to look, and in the UK, the numbers I'll refer to is 100 grand revenue per full-time employee. So if you've got 5 people in the business, you want to be generating, you know, 500K of revenue, you know, to be, you know, that's sort of the benchmark KPI you're looking for. So 10-person business should be doing about £1 million revenue. You know, for listeners in other countries, you may want to translate as required. So they're interesting metrics. And you talked about 5 or 6 people. I think it's the military who did the research, but if you look at leadership research, you know, the rule of thumb is I think each person can have a span of control of about 6 to 7 people as being the ideal number, that they can manage up to 7 people and still be in control of everything that goes on. Once they start trying to manage more than 7 people, you know, they start to lose control. You know, you get gaps, you get reworks, you get, you know, missed opportunities and deadlines and what have you. And here's my total anecdotal experience, but again, it's the rule of thumb that I use. You know, the shift that I think the business owners really need to make, if I have a look at the businesses out there, when I look at them, if they're at about 1 million turnover, I have a look at how long they've been 1 million turnover, because 1 million turnover is kind of that 7 to 10 people. And, you know, the business owner, to get beyond that, that's when they need to shift their mindset and change their approach to leading rather than doing. And you have a look at the million, because if it's 2 people in the business, that's 2 owners at 5 or 6 people each, you know, sharing the workload, just duplicating, you know, 2 silos, replicating everything that's going on. So, and I think it's interesting. And when you have a look at all of the stats of the businesses out there, there's a big bottleneck or logjam of businesses at about 1 million turnover. Now, those that are willing and able to make the shift, once they take their business beyond 1 million turnover, they've got a fantastic opportunity to build a business beyond a lifestyle that can give them such opportunity, and they turn it in from a 1, then you got a £3 million business, and then a £10 million business. You know, it sounds really easy rolling it off, but the growth is actually, once you've got those foundations in place, it's actually not as hard as it sounds. I you know, suggest that the hardest part is actually getting your first employee, you know, or is one of the hardest, because once you take on your first employee, you've just halved or doubled, depending which way you look at it, your capacity, you know, near enough. And then every employee after that, it's lesser of an impact. So, yeah, the business owners I think we're talking to on this podcast are in that £1 million or million, you know, they're very close to it, or scaling through it really quickly, up to the £50 million sort of bracket. You know, it's that owner managed business, building a business over their lifetime and going, yeah, okay, so I've done that. Now I'm getting to the stage, I've been doing it for 10, 20, 30 years. I want to exit on my terms. And just taking us back to the beginning of the conversation, it sounds like you were intuitively thinking that when someone came to you and gave an offer and you said, nah, don't like that, you know, too many caveats, don't like that earn out, nah, I'll pass, thanks very much. To have the confidence to be able to do that, I think is if I just want to really ask, you know, is it because you were just totally unattached to the outcome, or was it because you were talking to 2 or 3 people at the same time and you thought, well, if they don't want to value it, you know, let me see where the you know, what changes I need to make in my business to make it more attractive, or let me just see if this other buyer wants to you know, make a better offer.
I think the key point about that is the business was very successful.
Yep.
So it was churning off money. From my point of view, without any, you know, we worked hard, but it wasn't hard work, if that makes sense. So that was always the caveat that, yeah, if we didn't sell, it's not a big issue. The other thing, and I talk about this quite a lot, and you'll be aware of this as well, is being aware of market values. And I actually I sent a newsletter out to my database last week about exactly this point. Somebody comes up to you and says, I'll give you £1 million for your business. Now, intuitively, you go, oh, £1 million, that's fantastic. But actually, how do you know whether that's a good offer or not? You're only going to know if you're aware of what the market values are. And because there was a lot of M&A activity in our sector, and it was quite public knowledge, the sort of figures that were being, or the multiples that were coming out, we were able to quite easily go, well, that's a good offer, that's a bad offer, because we were aware of what we were worth. So putting all that together, so not being tied to the decision, understanding our value, and at the same time not being emotionally tied to the business, all those things together allowed us to be able to sit there and go, yeah, we can decide that's not a good offer, that's a good offer, that's you know, that's a bad offer, whatever it might be. I think at the time our market multiples were about 5.5, and I think we ended up at something like 6.5 on our sale, so we knew it was a good offer.
Okay. And Phil, if you were to start the process today all over again, what would you do differently?
I think the one thing I would do differently is I would do more acquisitions.
Okay,
because,
so you would grow organically first. Or
yeah,
not?
we grew the whole thing organically. We made a couple of very small acquisitions, made a couple of strategic, at the time felt like big, but they weren't particularly big acquisitions. But post-sale, I've got more interested in M&A, and the whole buy and build concept. I think I can see the logic in it, and I'm fascinated in it, and particularly in that idea that actually, if you put 3 or 4 smaller businesses together, maybe at 2 or 3 times, cumulatively, you've then got a business that's actually worth maybe 4 or 5 times, because the value becomes bigger. Yep. The bigger the business, or the multiples become bigger, the bigger the business becomes. So we did it the long, hard way. We did it all pretty much organically. I think I would have maybe hit the market harder and done more acquisitions. And also, one thing I'm more aware of now is acquisition structure. So if I'm going to buy a business for £1 million, I don't need £1 million in my pocket to buy it. You know, I can buy it maybe over 2 years or 3 years, and then it becomes self-financing, and all those sort of things come into play. You've also obviously got the downside of synergies and people falling out and duplication of jobs and all that sort of stuff. I know it's not that easy, but that's probably the difference I would make.
Okay. And that's through the growth cycle. And what about when it comes to your personal exit, when you're starting to think about exiting your business? What would you do differently from that side of things?
I think the one thing we didn't do, and I can see now why we didn't do it, was actually we weren't sale ready. There's lots of stuff you have to get in place when you do a sale. You've got to get all your contracts in place. You've got to get all your terms and conditions in place. Your staff contracts in place. You've got to have your data in a format that acquirers want. You've got to. We didn't have any issues with our debtors, but those sort of things. I compare it to a bit of DIY when you're selling the house. While you're living in the house, the fact that door squeaks and there's a scratch down that wall and the backyard hasn't been mowed for months is not a problem. When you come to sell, you go, do you know what? We'll paint the house. We'll sort out that squeaky door, that thing that doesn't work properly. We'll take that away and we'll get rid of it. So it's that tidying up and dressing the house, I think you need to do as a business, but there's the basics of getting all your ducks in a row as well before you sell it. And I was in the situation where during the sale process, the client or the acquirer was asking for data that we had in raw form, but not in the format that they used it to analyze. So I had to go backwards 2 or 3 years and put reports together that we didn't have, although we had the raw data, because we weren't sale ready.
Yep.
So there's various things you need to do to get your, as I say, selling your house is very, very similar. There are certain things you would do before you put your house on the market. And again, the same is with a business. And we didn't do that because we weren't proactive for sale at the time.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. If you're going to sell a house, you'd put a coat of paint on and what have you. And if you were thinking 2 or 3 years down the track, you might go, you know what? The house, if I spend $5,000 to put an ensuite in here, I'll get 30 grand more. And there's similar things in the business. I can just put a coat of paint on it and tidy it up, or I can do some things. I can get all of my documentation ready and in anticipation of a buyer asking for that, because a buyer's lens is different through an owner's lens. They're going to want different information. But if I can start early enough, there's some things that I can do the equivalent to putting an ensuite on. So that's fantastic advice.
And even financial things like, I would normally pay myself a dividend now, but actually I won't, because then it looks like there's more money in the bank and then we look more profitable, but I'll get it back when we sell because I'm getting a multiple. Just little things like that should be in your mind if you're thinking about selling.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, those ones, because when we're moving up the scale, depending on the size of the business, the savvy buyers just look right through that and they go, they're not paying enough dividends. And we go, hang on, you can't win. So we've got to get it right depending on our audience. So great stuff. Hey, Phil, look, I ask all my guests this, and it's a final question for the audience. What's the one thing that you would love audience members, listeners, to take away from our conversation today?
I think specific to exit, I think the key thing is make yourself redundant as the business owner. That is the one key thing you need to do as a business owner if you're preparing for sale. If you're running your business and you think you're staying in your business, I always say people, just go for it. If you've got an idea, you think it's a good idea, you've chucked it around and looked at some stats, gut feeling, thinks this feels like a good idea, go for it.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Hey, thanks for sharing with us, Phil. Really appreciate your time today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me on.